Welcome to the Building Web3 Podcast. Today I'm here with my good friend Fabian. He is the CEO at the Web3 Foundation. Foundation. Talk to us a little bit about what was your come to crypto moment? How did you get into this whole space?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm in the space full time professionally since 2016. I started at a company back then called FCore, now called Parity Technologies. It was one of the first hires there, mostly focused on Ethereum core development. Like we were building one of the two major Ethereum node implementations. And then in some point in 2017, we've decided that we have lots of ideas on what blockchains could be able to do. And thought, okay, actually the Ethereum protocol and specification that we're implementing is a bit of a limitation for us to unfold all of our ideas. And we started our own project, and that's what Polkadot is today. So I spent 6 years or so at Parity, helped build the technology, the company, the ecosystem around Polkadot, and then left in 2020, 2021, had a short hiatus, and then came back into the Web3 Foundation, which is sort of like the other core organization behind Polkadot, and joined as the CEO end of last year. So almost a year now into this new role.
So talk to us a little bit about the limitations you guys saw in Ethereum and what kind of led you guys to build Polkadot.
Yeah, so like I said, we were very close to just how Ethereum worked from a core software engineering perspective. So one of the co-founders of Parity, also one of the co-founders of Polkadot, is Gavin Wood, who is also one of the co-founders of Ethereum. Lots of people sort of like from the early days of Ethereum from the Ethereum Foundation were part of the Polkadot team early on. So I think the main, and this is not, I think this was an insight that a lot of people had at the time that were quite involved, in particular when Ethereum started to first pick up a little bit of steam beyond just what was there, in the Bitcoin community and so on, like in the crypto community before. Early to mid 2017, when ICOs and so on started to get their boom. It wasn't scalable enough, right? You had projects that tried to fundraise and, really just, a couple of thousand or tens of thousands of users trying to get into a certain sale at a certain amount of time would completely clog up the network. It was very difficult to use. UX was terrible, key management was terrible, but also the market infrastructure was terrible. Actually getting in and out of tokens in a compliant way and so on. So I think, the core idea everyone was very excited about, but then there was just missing pieces that didn't fully add up yet. Governance was really super not figured out yet. How do we actually, keep evolving a decentralized network? So a lot of those things, how easy is it to build on it? How scalable is it? How do we govern it? A lot of those insights went into at least the early version of Polkadot. And a lot of those principles you'll still find today in Polkadot, but obviously Polkadot has also, evolved since then.
And then talk to us a little bit about the Web3 Foundation, and then we can circle back to Polkadot. What's the relationship between the Web3 Foundation and Polkadot? And you kind of walk us through the foundation itself.
Yeah, so there is Polkadot, which is really sort of like a network and a technology stack, and it's not an entity or anything like that. It's really and it's a community, right? It's really sort of like a crypto project, if you want. And then traditionally, there's been two main organizations behind that project. It's Parity, like the organization I just talked about that I sort of started my journey in, which is sort of the core engineering organization where a lot of the development, but also a lot of the early research happened, and it still remains the primary sort of engineering organization behind Polkadot. And then there's the Web3 Foundation, which got started in 2017, which is sort of like the protocol foundation behind Polkadot, with a bit of a broader mission than maybe a lot of other protocol foundations. We can speak a little bit about that, but most of what we do is really furthering the Polkadot ecosystem and its related technologies and so on. But the foundation being much more focused on making sure capital allocation, making sure the capital flows into the right places into the ecosystem, early stage research, education, those kind of things, community building, and Parity much more on the engineering side. And then by now, fast forward to sort of like 2024, tons and tons of course, organizations around that are part of the Polkadot ecosystem. But that's how it all started with those two organizations.
And then talk to us a little bit about, like, because Polkadot is, I'd say, like the flagship project. When you started, or when Polkadot was started, it was largely about fixing some of the issues you guys found in the Ethereum, community and code. Talk to us a little bit about, like, nowadays, what is the ultimate mission, or has the mission pretty much stayed the same? It's like resolving some of Ethereum's issues.
Yeah, I think, certainly what drove us to say, like, let's build Polkadot was certainly limitations in Ethereum. I think the same thing is true if you ask, some of the founders of Cosmos or Avalanche, right? This is a bunch of projects that got going at the same time that I think had, different approaches to solve the problems, but I think a lot of people saw similar issues. I think, if you look at Polkadot today, yeah, we're still about scalability, right? We're still about, it's not like, we're not going to care about how easy and how usable the tech stack is and so on anytime soon. But I think our ideas and how we think about those problems are much, much more refined, right? And I think if anything, if you look at what is in the Polkadot paper that got published 2016, it talks about parachains and parallelized chains and scaling through, making it very easy to build multiple blockchains and then be able to secure them and connect them. And if you look at what's happening in Ethereum land today, they're not called parachains, they're called rollups. If you look what's going on in the Cosmos ecosystem with zones, or in the Avalanche ecosystem, subnets, I think, or super chains, or, pick your ecosystem. Most ecosystems converge around those foundational ideas, right? Some have come to that conclusion earlier. I think we were pretty early. Some have come to that realization later. But if you look at the overall sort of like space right now, I think a lot of people have come to the same conclusion. I think today we're a little bit, we're kind of beyond that, right? Like in Polkadot, because we've been pretty early to that idea. I think we've seen the end of that movie. And while it solves a lot of problems around scalability, it actually introduces a lot of other problems around fragmentation and interoperability and so on. And so, we're now sort of like on the second iteration of Polkadot 2.0, what is adopt, and now really going into the next year into Polkadot 3.0, Jam Chain. I mean, we can talk about all of these things, but where we really, the core idea, right, still same. It's still about scalability. It's still about making it as easy as possible to build blockchain-enabled applications and chains. But how we go about it, right, is just significantly more sophisticated than the ideas that we could have had in 2016.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that what you guys pretty much worked on has now been adopted just under different names. So, if the original vision was kind of like parallelized chains with the parachains with really good cross-chain communication, you talked about how you encountered some issues that like maybe Ethereum and other chains will encounter in the future with like fragmentation, things of that nature. Talk to us about how you guys are kind of looking at like those fragmentation issues and how are you kind of how are you working to resolve them? Is it like in intense space and like everything's like just cross-chain native?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things to say. So like one, if you look at, I think Ethereum is probably the thing that most people are familiar with, so just using that as a reference. But like I said, it will work for a lot of other tech stacks and ecosystems as well. Ethereum's like cross-chain, multi-chain strategy, it's not like this is like a holistic thought-through strategy that was conceived in 2016, 2017, and then executed until now, right? This is more the path that Polkadot went, right? Like we sort of like saw a lot of these things. There was, literally, you can read the paper today. We'll outline a lot of those topics. It's more of an emerging strategy, right? Like people started like first it was sharding, but not really, and there's many sort of like roadmap changes, but eventually there's emerging strategy around layer twos, right? And then people built layer twos and sort of like settle them on ETH main chain. And because of that, even just as Polkadot sort of like just was initially conceived, a lot of those problems that you now encounter, it's not future problems for ETH layer twos, right? It's problems right now. I mean, if you look at how decentralized are, bless you, how decentralized are the sequences on Ethereum. I mean, a lot of those L2s are not particularly secure and certainly not particularly resilient or decentralized. If you look at how interoperability work, I mean, if you try to move assets from one optimistic rollup to like another, I mean, you're waiting hours, days, weeks, right, until challenging periods are over, right? Interoperability is not figured out at all. I mean, interoperability standards kind of exist if you're in the same tech stack, but certainly not across the Ethereum landscape, right? Those are all things that we try to tackle from day zero, right? Have a common protocol on how we actually secure the chains in Polkadot, have a common protocol on how these chains interact with each other, and so on. So I will say, even as Polkadot stands today, right, a lot of the things that Ethereum is running into right now are things you could have seen coming prior, but Ethereum is a huge ecosystem. It's much more emergent than maybe Polkadot was in its initial phases. So it's not like a finger pointing kind of thing, but I think it's also just a reality of a sort of like a large community that where a lot of stuff will necessarily be emergent. But even if you have those things, right, even if you have cross-chain communication and security and so on figured out, ultimately you still have a sort of fragmentation, because certain data, certain users, certain liquidity is only going to be on one chain, and you might be able to talk to other chain to access those, but you will have to do that asynchronously. That comes with all kinds of friction. That breaks sort of like a lot of the development patterns that developers are accustomed to, that maybe otherwise develop against a single chain. And where we're going now with something like Jan and Polkadot 3.0 is much more in the direction of sort of like semi-coherent state, right? You can have everything in one place when you need it, but then sort of like have it like spread out and scalable if you don't need it, right? And there's sort of like maybe a world where you can have the best of both, or a place where you can have the best of both worlds, right? You can have the horizontal scaling, lots of different chains, lots of customizability in those different chains, but then access to the same state when you need it. And this is really what Polkadot is going. And my guess is that is going to be a place where a lot of the rest of the space will go. Like I said, once a lot of those issues will become more apparent.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You guys are very ahead of the times and can see a lot of the problems that are coming in the future. Talk to us a little bit about the Web3 Foundation itself, and like how you guys is the goal like, hey, to build up Polkadot as big as possible and like bring on new dApp developers. Talk to us a little bit about like the foundation.
Yeah, so foundation, generally, right, we're here to sort of like bring Web3 as a vision into the world. And if you look at the history of the foundation, like I said, foundation was founded 2017, and like really the term Web3 was coined by Gavin 2014 in a blog post, and it was a little bit used in the Ethereum space at the time, but not really to a huge extent. And so when we named the Web3 Foundation, I think Web3 had a bit of a different connotation than it has today. So it wasn't until DeFi summer of 2020, 2021, that Web3 really caught up as a term for the overall industry, right? Before that, it was crypto, it was blockchain, or it was sort of separate industries. The 2014, 2017 kind of Web3 terminology, I think, is much more rooted in post-Snowden revelation, Cambridge Analytica, sort of this insight that there's huge amounts of government and corporate control over our digital lives. And we should try to introduce some form of counterbalance to this huge power imbalance that we're building in our sort of increasingly digitally lives. And blockchain, crypto, but also related technologies can be that foundation. And so everything we do at the Web3 Foundation is under that umbrella, right? But there's a bazillion things you could be doing if you want to further that mission. Polkadot is sort of just one of the ways we express that, and is currently sort of a primary way on how we express that vision and those ideas. So a lot of the things you see in the design decisions and in how the Web3 Foundation interacts in terms of getting adoption on the network and so on. Like resilience of the technology stack and resilience of the social layer within the community and the ecosystem are really at the forefront of a lot of the things, because like I said, otherwise you might be able to trade off some of these resilience metrics for performance or speed and so on the short term. But the question is then, why not just throw a centralized database behind it in the first place and have all of the performance in the world, right? So I think if I would say, so like one really constant theme throughout the years is, make something that's very useful with all of its aspects, but at the same time that's very resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great goal to have. Talk to us a little bit about like how you guys are supported. I know you guys specifically because you guys for your grant program. Talk to us a little bit about like how you structure like decentralized funding to try to grow kind of the Web3 ecosystem itself.
So as I said earlier, like one of the primary functions of the Web3 Foundation, I'd say maybe one of the main levers we have in the foundation is capital. So we sit on capital, and we want to further sort of like this Web3 mission and Polkadot with it. And there's many ways you can spend capital that doesn't go particularly well, right? Like just throwing money at things isn't going to solve all of your problems, or isn't going to go after all of the opportunities in sort of like an effective way. So there is, the way the Web3 Foundation has thought about capital allocation has also evolved. I think traditionally a lot of protocol foundations have grants programs. I think that's a pretty standard way. It's something that's known from academia and from like non-crypto foundations and so on. And a lot of those are focused on, let's pay people to build technical solutions in an open source manner, which is actually a great tool if that's what you want to achieve, right? If you want to have more open source technologies out there. I would argue that if you look at what's holding back, the wider industry, and with that also Polkadot, right? It's not like we have a lack of not enough open source technologies or software out there, right? That's not really the limiting factor. I think the limiting factor is now much more around building useful things, like building shit that people want, knowing how the distribution works for those things, being able to integrate those things into where users already are, meaning in the traditional world somehow, right? That might be traditional gaming, that might be traditional finance, whichever sort of like industry you're in. But ultimately, really, it comes to just build something that people actually want. And I think that the space, if anything, has been a little bit too busy with allocating capital to, infrastructure, to build more infrastructure for then eventually some, magical moment where users are coming. And I think we've built probably too many protocols and not enough products. And we focus maybe a little bit too much on developers and not enough on entrepreneurs, like really product-minded people that know how to build a business, that know how to attract users, that know how to raise money, that know how to ultimately make money, right? Like actually build sustainable businesses. And so, all of that is just to say, I think this is much more where we're going with the foundation, right? How we allocate money is looking at what is actually the rate limiting factor for the success of Polkadot. And like I said, I think a lot of those things are true for the wider space, and then allocate funding to those places. Grants can still, standard grants, open source software development grants can still play a big role in that. But I don't think they should be the primary tool to achieve those things.
Now, do you kind of lean towards maybe the retroactive grants? Like there's certain kinds of, like I've seen definitely an evolution in grants where it's like, hey, if you're just willing to build on, we'll take Arbitrum as an example. It's like, hey, we'll give you, 100,000 if you can hit certain KPIs. Nowadays, it seems like a lot of organizations are doing like, hey, somebody already started, they're already gaining traction. And then it's like, then they kind of layer on some additional funds to help them support them scaling, or maybe, adopting some new new market. What's your kind of general theory on that? Or is it still like, hey, from the get-go, we're interested in people that are going to build apps that can bring Web3 to a wider audience?
I think it depends a bit what kind of audience or what kind of who you're funding, right? So in the Polkadot ecosystem, for example, like Polkadot has always leaned like very heavily into on-chain governance. Like really anything that happens on the network is sort of like voted on chain, and even network upgrades themselves can be sort of like registered on chain, and then all of the nodes automatically upgrade. It's really a self-evolving organism, if you want, right? The Polkadot network. And with that, there's also a big on-chain DAO that distributes funds. And so like, the way the on-chain DAO distributes funds might be different than the way the Web3 Foundation distributes funds, just also because of the mechanisms that we can have, right? The Web3 Foundation can go into an actual legal agreement with someone and say, hey, this is a service level agreement. You have to do these things. If not, we're going to go legally after you. But an on-chain DAO can't really do these things. And so I think for an on-chain DAO, I think something like retroactive funding is actually a pretty good tool, because it's going to be very hard for you to hold people accountable as an on-chain DAO. I mean, all you can really do is send money to an address and hope for the best kind of thing, right? And if that's the case, then it often makes sense like, hey, we first want you to achieve something, and then we're going to send you the money, because otherwise we have no way of having any guarantees around this. For something like the Web3 Foundation, that's different, right? If we have an actual off-chain entity that we're working with, absolutely, we can go into a services level agreement. We can go into a grants agreement. We can make an investment, right? We can say, hey, great, we're happy to go into this round if you find a lead investor and you can convince someone other than us that what you're trying to do is actually a good idea. Like I said, there's sort of like, that's certainly one component. The other component, which I kind of alluded to, I think already, is like, is the other side, does the other side try to be a business? Like if the other side tries to be a business, I think you should approach it. You should treat them like that, right? You should give them an investment. You should be their client. You should, you shouldn't just subsidize them through years and years of development in the hopes that at some point, they'll figure out the business part of things. But if the other side is not really trying to be a business, right? If the other side is maybe a common good entity in the space that maybe tries to do hackathons or marketing or events or something like that, they're probably never going to be an investable target. Maybe they break even, but they're never going to make tons of money off of this, right? Okay, maybe an investment is not the right approach. This is a long way of saying it depends. But I do think the space would be well advised to be a little bit more nuanced on how funds are distributed and just what kind of who you're trying to give funds to and what kind of options do you actually have in your hands to do so.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting problem that everyone's grappling with, and I've seen a few different iterations on it, and I'm sure it will continue to iterate in the future. And talk to us a little bit about some of the trends you see in like Web3 and blockchain development and how they align with the mission of the foundation and Polkadot.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for Polkadot more specifically, and I think there's implications for the broader space. So one thing that certainly has emerged in the Polkadot ecosystem, maybe in the last 6 months or so, I mean, relatively recently, really over the course of the summer, is we see much more of sort of like the kinds that I was saying earlier. Like we see much more like really product-minded, business-minded people that have, really have a vision on how to build something that's extremely useful, that has real users and so on, and a little bit less of the we're tinkering around, we're here for the technology kind of thing. So that's one thing, and you can see it on sort of like on-chain metrics and so on. Like there's actually just lots of like real usage sort of like coming in, because I think also because a lot of the UX issues are being ironed out, and there's just more people that are focused on building something that is really useful. I think that probably the two places where we see this in a Polkadot emerge the most, so like the two verticals, is around gaming and entertainment. So Mythical Games, I think, is the most famous example in the Polkadot ecosystem, one of the largest, if not the largest, gaming play out there, or blockchain gaming play out there. And the other piece I think that we're seeing is around dPIN, so like decentralized physical infrastructure. Most notably, probably Peak on the Polkadot ecosystem. So they've one of the largest, again, if not the largest, dPIN platforms out there. Just done the largest coin list sale, I think since 4 years or so. We see sort of like specific verticals emerge, right? And then we see a more serious mindset around really building things in those verticals. And I think you see the same thing in other ecosystems, maybe not specifically for those verticals, but a less of a let's try everything kind of approach, right? Like a less of a maybe Uber on blockchain if you go all the way back. And it's a little bit more clear where the interesting stuff could be. And then there's more serious people going after those things.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I often think that the crypto apps or the Web3 apps of the future, they won't feel that different. Like the UX issue is kind of the biggest hurdle I see for anything. Like my mom never goes to a website. She's like, oh wow, MongoDB. She's just like, yeah, it works and it's fast. So I often wonder when we can finally have the apps that really just like blend crypto in a way that feels native to most people. So TBD on when that'll all come. But finally, talk to us a little bit about like where developers and innovators who are interested in like the Web3 Foundation and the Polkadot ecosystem, like where can they get involved? Where can they like find out more information?
Yeah, so I say probably the two best resources is like website and socials. So if you go on polkadot.com or web3.foundation, you'll find everything I've been talking about here in terms of like the project and the organization behind it. Same thing on the socials, like at Polkadot, at Web3 Foundation, on all of the big socials. Those are probably good places to follow along. Like I said, there's all kinds of ways to get involved. You can build on Polkadot. You can use apps on Polkadot. You can get involved in governance. I think we're in a pretty interesting inflection point, both in terms of what's happening in the ecosystem, but also what's happening on the technology side. So I think a lot of what people thought of Polkadot traditionally have changed, right? Polkadot is really evolving quite quickly on the tech side. So even if you're just interested in like cool tech and interesting tech and where the blockchain space could be going, definitely also worth looking into it.
Absolutely. Well, everyone go get involved, go follow the socials, go check out the website, go get involved with Fabian online, and let's continue building the future of Web3.